Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I speak in support of the motion, and let me say at the outset that this national security breach is about as serious as it gets. A national security breach that occurred at Canada's highest security lab that is responsible for handling and studying some of the most dangerous pathogens and viruses. For 3 years, this Prime Minister has been anything but transparent. Instead of informing Canadians about this massive national security breach that took place under his watch, he covered it up. In an unprecedented campaign of obstruction, the Prime Minister defied 4 orders of Parliament, and for the first time in Canadian history, he took the Speaker of the House of Commons to court to block the documents, 600 pages of documents that have finally been produced to this committee, and he called a snap election in an effort to avoid producing those documents, an election that, incidentally, the Beijing regime interfered on his behalf to the benefit of the Liberal Party. So now, after 3 years of cover-up and obstruction, we finally have the documents. And what is evident upon reviewing these documents is that there was a massive breakdown with respect to the flow of intelligence and information within the Government of Canada. And that is one of the central matters for which this motion seeks to get to the bottom of. To underscore the degree to which there was a breakdown with respect to information and intelligence, the head of special pathogens, scientist one of 2, who is a central figure in collaborating with the Beijing regime, by the time a preliminary investigation was launched in the fall of 2018, that scientist, Dr. Chu, had traveled to the PRC on at least 5 occasions, had collaborated with PRC officials, including officials within the People's Liberation Army. Among those Dr. Chu collaborated with was none other than Beijing's foremost expert in biodefense and bioterrorism. Bioterrorism. And Dr. Chu had been paid for her travels to Beijing, all apparently unknown to PHAC. An investigation finally gets launched in September of 2018, but Dr. Chu continues to work in the lab until July 5th of 2019, 10 months later. During that 10-month window, Dr. Chu continued to have unfettered access to the lab. By March of 2019, a report had been issued in which PHAC had determined that Dr. Chu had been actively collaborating with the Beijing regime, with the PLA, clandestinely, without the knowledge of PHAC, that she had shipped antibodies to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And yet, while PHAC knew that, Dr. Chu was the central figure in facilitating the transfer of Ebola to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, one of the most dangerous and most deadly viruses in the world. How did that happen? How was that allowed to take place? This breakdown in national security has had serious consequences. In fact, CSIS and PHAC have determined that this breach represents a very serious and credible danger to the Government of Canada as a whole, and that it constitutes a credible threat to Canada's economic security. Now, Mr. Chair, as Mr. Chong noted, the Prime Minister is singularly responsible for the machinery of government with special responsibilities for national security. But buck stops with the Prime Minister. And part of the questions that we need answers to is, when did the Prime Minister know about this massive national security breach? Did he learn about it in 2019, or did he learn about it in January of 2021? We don't know, or sometime in between. Let me conclude by saying very simply that the national security culture of the Government of Canada starts at the top. It starts with the Prime Minister, who has special responsibilities when it comes to national security. This Prime Minister set the tone for the national security culture when he said, famously, that he admires Beijing's basic dictatorship. In other words, he admires a brutal, authoritarian, genocidal regime. And we have seen over the past 8 years of Justin Trudeau interference on the part of Beijing in our post-secondary institutions, interference in our elections, interference in the targeting of sitting members of Parliament, interference in terms of setting up illegal police stations, and the intimidation of Chinese Canadians. And now we have learned that Beijing was given unfettered access to some of Canada's most sensitive biological secrets. After 8 years of Justin Trudeau, Canada's national security culture is broken, and an incident on the scale of what happened in Winnipeg is a direct result of that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.